The heat in Lone Mesa did not ask for permission to enter. It kicked down the door at sunrise and stayed until long after the moon had risen. It was the year 1875, and the Texas territory was a place where a man could make a fortune or a grave with equal speed. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and the dry, metallic tang of the red dust that coated everything from the church steps to the spittoons in the saloon. Lately, a new sound had begun to cut through the mournful howling of the coyotes. It was the sharp, arrogant shriek of a train whistle from the tracks being laid 10 miles east, a mechanical promise that civilization was coming to strangle the wildness out of the land. Clara Cartwright was awake long before that whistle blew. She rose at 4 in the morning, just as she had done every day since her father died 6 years ago. The darkness in her room was heavy and stifling. She moved quietly, splashing her face with tepid water from the pitcher on the washstand. In the mirror, the dim light showed a face that was pleasant enough, though she had never been called a beauty. Her eyes were the color of weak tea, and her hair was a practical shade of brown that she pulled back severely to keep it out of the churn and the wash basin. She walked down the creaking stairs of Cartwright's boarding house, tying her apron strings with the efficiency of a soldier. Today was Tuesday. In 3 days, it would be Saturday. In 3 days, she would be Mrs. Thomas Hale. The thought should have sent a thrill through her blood. Instead, it felt like checking off an item on a ledger. Thomas was a good man, or so everyone in Lone Mesa said. He owned a ranch with 500 head of cattle. He had a house with glass windows and a roof that did not leak. He was safe. He was the anchor that would keep the Cartwright family from drifting into destitution. Clara entered the kitchen and began the morning ritual. She stoked the iron stove, the heat hitting her face like a physical blow. She sliced bacon, cracked eggs into a ceramic bowl, and set the coffee to boil. The boarding house was full. There were railroad men, cattle hands passing through, and a traveling salesman selling patent medicines. They all needed to be fed. By 6 in the morning, the kitchen was chaotic. Her mother, Mrs. Cartwright, bustled in, looking more tired than a woman of 50 should. She carried the weight of the world in the stoop of her shoulders. "Is the coffee ready, Clara, Mrs.?" Cartwright asked, wiping her brow with a handkerchief. "Mr. Henderson complained yesterday that the grits were lumpy. We cannot afford complaints, not with the mortgage due." "The coffee is ready, Mother, and the grits are smooth," Clara replied, her voice steady. "Go sit down. I will handle the service." The door to the dining room swung open, and Isabel entered. Belle. Even at this hour, Clara's younger sister looked as if she had just stepped out of a fashion plate from a magazine in St. Louis. Her golden hair was pinned up in loose, artful curls, and her dress, though simple cotton, was cinched tight to show off a waist that attracted every eye in the territory. Belle plucked a piece of bacon from the serving platter and nibbled it. "You look like a ghost. Clara, are you trying to scare Thomas away before the wedding? Some of us have to work." "Belle," Clara said, taking the platter back. "And some of us were born to be looked at." Belle laughed, a sound like wind chimes, bright and hollow. "I do not know how you do it. Scrubbing floors, feeding strangers. If I were marrying Thomas, I would make him hire a maid the very first day." "Mrs." Cartwright sighed. "Belle, leave your sister alone. Clara is doing what is necessary. Thomas is a fine catch, a very fine catch." "He is all right," Belle said, leaning against the doorframe. "A bit dull, but rich enough, though I suppose dull suits you. Clara, you always did like safety." Clara ignored the barb, though it found its mark. She pushed past her sister and carried the food into the dining room. The room was filled with the smell of tobacco smoke and fried grease. Men sat at the long wooden table, digging into their breakfasts with the desperation of wolves. At the far end of the table, Dr. Miller was speaking with the railroad foreman. Dr. Miller was a fastidious man who insisted on wiping his silverware with a napkin before eating. "I tell you, it is going to be trouble," the foreman was saying, spraying crumbs as he spoke. "The tracks are heading straight for the river basin. That is the Comanche hunting ground. We have seen smoke signals on the ridges for 3 days. "The army will handle the savages." A cowboy across the table grunted. "They have been pushed back to the reservation lines. They know better than to fight the train." "Do not be so sure," the foreman replied. "You have heard the stories about that one they call Tahan the Ghost." Clara paused as she refilled a coffee cup. The name sent a ripple of silence down the table. "I heard he can put an arrow through a coin at 100 paces, a young traveler whispered. "They say he hates the white man so much he refuses to speak our language, even though he knows it." "He speaks it," the cowboy argued. "He just chooses not to waste breath on us. They say he walks so quietly he can stand behind you for an hour and you would never know until he cut your throat." "That is enough," Mrs. Cartwright said sharply from the kitchen doorway. "We do not need that kind of talk at the breakfast table. Eat your food." Clara moved back to the kitchen, but the name stayed with her. Tahan. The townspeople used him as a boogeyman to scare children, but there was something else in their voices. Fear, yes, but also a grudging respect for something wild that could not be tamed. By mid-morning, the heat was oppressive. Clara took the heavy oak bucket and walked to the well at the edge of the property. The boarding house sat on the very perimeter of Lone Mesa, beyond the fence line. The scrubland stretched out endlessly, broken only by the jagged red rocks of the canyonlands in the distance. She hooked the bucket to the rope and let it drop. It hit the water with a distant splash. She began to turn the crank, the wood groaning in protest. The physical labor was grounding. It kept her mind off the wedding dress that sat half-finished in her room, and the cold realization that she was marrying Thomas Hale not out of passion, but out of survival. Movement caught her eye. On the rise of the hill, perhaps 200 yards away, a group of riders appeared. They were not cowboys. They did not ride with the heavy, slumping posture of men working cattle. They sat erect, moving with the fluid grace of the horses beneath them. Comanche. Clara froze, her hands gripping the rough handle of the well crank. There were 5 of them. They had stopped on the ridge, looking down at the town. The heat shimmered off the ground, making them look like mirages. One rider separated from the group. He rode a paint horse with markings that looked like splashes of ink against milk. He wore buckskins that were worn and dusted with red earth, and his hair hung long and black, bound with leather strips. It was him. It had to be Tahan. He sat motionless, his gaze sweeping over the rooftops of Lone Mesa. Then his head turned, even across the distance. Clara felt the impact of his eyes. He was looking directly at her. Fear should have sent her running back to the house. That was what a sensible woman would do. That was what Thomas would expect her to do. But Clara stood rooted to the spot. She felt a strange, electric jolt run up her spine, a sensation she had never felt when Thomas held her hand. The warrior did not make a threatening gesture. He did not reach for the bow slung across his back or the rifle in the scabbard. He simply looked at her. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you." Then, slowly, deliberately, he dipped his chin, a nod. It was so slight that she might have imagined it, but in that second, the air between them seemed to vanish. He turned his horse with the pressure of his knees and rejoined his group. In a heartbeat, they dipped below the ridge and were gone, leaving only a cloud of dust settling in the hot wind. Clara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I have Thomas," she whispered to herself, forcing the crank to turn. "I have a house. I have a future." But the water she drew up tasted like dust. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations for the town dance. It was the unofficial start of the wedding festivities, a chance for the town to celebrate the union of the Cartwright and Hale families. The town hall was draped in red, white, and blue bunting. Lanterns were strung between the posts, waiting for dusk. Clara bathed and dressed in her best blue muslin gown. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color into them. When she walked downstairs, Thomas was waiting in the parlor. Thomas Hale was a soft-looking man for a rancher. He had pale blue eyes and a mustache that he waxed carefully. He wore a suit that cost more than the boarding house made in 6 months. "Clara," he said, smiling politely. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, planting a dry, brief kiss on her knuckles. "You look tidy, very presentable." "Thank you, Thomas," Clara said. She waited for a spark, a flutter, anything. She felt nothing but the rough texture of his wool coat. "And here is the real flower of the evening." Isabel swept into the room. She was wearing a dress of deep crimson silk, cut lower in the bodice than was strictly proper for an unmarried girl. The color made her skin look like porcelain. "Thomas," Belle cooed, gliding over to him. She did not offer her hand to be kissed. Instead, she took his arm with both of her hands, pressing it against her side. "You look so handsome tonight, a true cattle baron." Thomas blushed, a deep red color rising up his neck. He looked at Belle, and for a moment, his polite smile faltered into something more hungry. "You look lovely, Isabel, truly lovely." "Shall we go?" Belle asked, ignoring Clara entirely. "The music is starting, and I intend to dance until the soles of my shoes wear through." She pulled Thomas toward the door. He stumbled a step, then followed, looking back at Clara almost as an afterthought. "Coming, Clara." "Yes," Clara said quietly. "I am coming." She walked behind them, watching how Belle leaned into Thomas, how Thomas inclined his head to catch her whispers. A cold knot of dread formed in Clara's stomach. It was not jealousy. Exactly, it was humiliating. She was the one wearing the ring, but she felt like the chaperone. The town hall was hot and crowded. The fiddler was playing a reel, and the floorboards shook with the stomping of boots. The smell of cheap perfume, sweat, and whiskey hung thick in the air. "Mrs." Cartwright found Clara near the punch bowl. "Smile, girl," she hissed. "You look like you are at a funeral. This is your night." "Belle is dancing with Thomas," Clara said, nodding toward the center of the floor. Belle and Thomas were spinning. Thomas was laughing, a loud, uninhibited sound Clara had rarely heard. Belle's head was thrown back, her throat exposed, her eyes locked on Thomas's face. "She is just being a sister." "Mrs." Cartwright said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Listen to me, Clara. We are $300 in debt to the bank. If this wedding does not happen, we lose the house. We lose everything. You have to hold him. Do you understand?" "I understand. Mother." The pressure sat on Clara's chest like an anvil. She was not just marrying a man. She was saving a business. She was securing a roof. Love was a luxury for people who could afford to pay their bills. The music stopped, and the crowd parted. A man in a pinstriped suit stepped onto the small platform near the fiddlers. It was the railroad representative from the breakfast table. "Ladies and gentlemen of Lone Mesa," he shouted, his voice booming. "A fine evening, I just want to say. Drink up and be merry, because within 6 months, the Iron Horse will be running right past your doors." Cheers erupted, mostly from the merchants and the saloon owners. The ranchers looked less enthusiastic. "We are making progress," the man continued. "We are bringing the world to you. And let me assure you, no savages will stand in the way of American commerce. The Army has assured us that the Comanche problem will be dealt with, permanently." The cheers grew louder. Clara looked around the room. Faces were flushed with alcohol and excitement. They talked of extermination as if it were simply clearing weeds from a garden. She remembered the eyes on the ridge, the quiet dignity of the man on the paint horse. "I see you." Had he looked at the town with hate? No. He had looked at it with a calm, terrifying patience. Clara felt a sudden need for air. She slipped out the side door of the hall. Stepping into the cool night, the noise of the party faded to a dull roar behind her. The sky was vast and littered with millions of stars, indifferent to the petty struggles of the people below. She walked to the edge of the porch and leaned against the railing. She could see the silhouette of the boarding house in the distance. Hiding, Clara jumped. Belle was standing in the doorway, fanning herself with a lace fan. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with triumph. "I just needed air," Clara said. Belle walked over, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. She stood next to Clara, looking out at the dark prairie. "Thomas is a weak man, you know," Belle said conversationally. Clara stiffened. "He is my fiancé, Belle." "He is a man who needs to be told what he wants," Belle said. She turned to face Clara, and the moonlight caught the sharp, predatory angle of her smile. "He wants excitement. Clara, he wants fire. You are warm milk. You are reliable. You are safe." "Safe is good," Clara defended, though her voice shook. "Safe builds a life." "Safe is boring," Belle countered. She reached out and smoothed a stray hair from Clara's temple. The gesture was possessive, condescending. "If you do not hold on tight, sister, the men of the West will forget you. They chase the horizon. They chase the storm. They do not settle for the fence post unless they have no other choice." "What are you saying, Belle?" "I am saying," Belle whispered, leaning close, smelling of roses and Thomas's cologne, "that the night is young, and you should fix your hair. You look untidy." Belle turned and walked back into the light and noise of the party. Clara stood alone in the dark. She looked down at her hands. They were rough, red from hot water and lye soap. Hands that worked, hands that held things together. She thought of the wedding dress hanging in her room. She thought of Thomas's soft, damp palms, and unbidden. She thought of the warrior on the ridge, the man who had not spoken a word, yet had communicated more in a single nod than Thomas had in 2 years of courtship. From the darkness of the prairie, a coyote howled. It was a lonely, wild sound. Clara shivered. She smoothed her dress, fixed her hair as best she could, and turned back toward the door. She did not know it yet, but the safety she clung to was already unraveling. The storm Belle spoke of was not on the horizon. It was already in the room, dancing in crimson silk, and out in the dark, the silent watcher was waiting. The wedding was 3 days away, but for Clara Cartwright, the end of her life as she knew it would begin tonight. The fiddle music inside the town hall swirled like a dust devil, frantic and dizzying. The air was thick with the heat of 200 bodies, the smell of pomade, cheap lavender water, and the underlying musk of unwashed wool. Lanterns strung from the rafters cast a swaying, golden light that made the shadows in the corners jump and dance. Clara Cartwright stood near the punch bowl, her hand resting lightly on Thomas Hale's arm. His sleeve felt stiff under her fingers, and the man himself felt just as rigid. He kept patting his vest pocket, checking for his pocket watch, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "You are quiet tonight, Thomas," Clara said, pitching her voice to be heard over the stomp of boots on the floorboards. "Just the heat, Clara," Thomas replied, pulling a handkerchief to dab at his upper lip. "It is stifling here. Perhaps we should step out." "Not yet, Mrs." Cartwright appeared at Clara's elbow, her face flushed with determination. "The mayor is about to make the toast. You must be seen. Smile. Thomas, you look like you have swallowed a lemon." Thomas forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. The crowd began to press in, forming a loose circle around them. These were the people Clara had known all her life. The baker, the blacksmith, the women she stitched quilts with. Their eyes were bright with expectation, but Clara felt a prickle of unease on the back of her neck. It was the sensation of being watched, but not with kindness. The music sputtered to a halt. Mayor Higgins, a portly man with a face red from whiskey and sun, stepped up onto a sturdy crate near the bandstand. He raised a glass of punch high in the air. "Friends, neighbors," the mayor bellowed. "We are gathered here for a fine occasion. Lone Mesa is growing. The railroad is coming, and with it, we celebrate the union of 2 of our finest families." Clara felt the blood rush to her face. She lowered her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Once the words were spoken, it was final. She would be safe. "We have watched young Thomas Hale grow into a fine cattleman," the mayor continued, swaying slightly. "And we have watched the Cartwright girls bloom like desert roses. Tonight, we make official the promise between Thomas and our dear Clara." The sentence was never finished. From the edge of the crowd, A flash of crimson cut through the sea of brown and gray coats. Isabel. Belle. She moved with a terrifying purpose. She did not walk. She glided, stepping into the center of the circle as if the floorboards belonged to her alone. Before the mayor could draw his next breath, Belle was standing in front of Thomas. "Thomas," she said. Her voice was not loud, but in the sudden silence of the hall, it carried to the rafters. Thomas looked at her, his eyes widening. He looked like a rabbit caught in the shadow of a hawk. He did not step back. He did not look at Clara. Belle reached out and took Thomas's hands. Then, with a boldness that made the older women in the room gasp, she pulled him down to her. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. It was not a chaste peck. It was a claim. It was hungry and possessive, performed for an audience of the entire town. Time seemed to fracture for Clara. She stood frozen, her hand still hovering where Thomas's arm had been a second ago. The glass of punch slipped from her numb fingers. It hit the floor with a shattering crash, spraying red liquid onto the hem of her blue dress. The sound broke the spell. The hall erupted into a collective intake of breath, followed immediately by a wave of whispers that hissed like steam escaping a valve. Belle broke the kiss, but she did not let go of Thomas. She turned to face the crowd, her arm looped through his, her face glowing with a triumphant flash. "Stop the music," Belle laughed, though the music had already stopped. "Mayor, put down your glass. There is a mistake in your toast." "Isabel, Mrs." Cartwright shrieked, clutching her chest. "What are you doing?" "I'm correcting a lie. Mother," Belle declared, tossing her golden curls. She looked at Thomas, her eyes daring him to contradict her. "Thomas and I have realized that love cannot be bartered like a sack of grain. He does not love Clara. He never has. It was just an arrangement, was it not? Thomas, a business deal." Thomas looked at the floor, then at Belle, then finally, fleetingly, at Clara. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked weak. He looked pathetic. And yet, he did not pull away from Belle. "Thomas," Clara whispered. The words scraped her throat. Thomas licked his dry lips. Clara, I am sorry. Belle and we have a connection, a passion. I cannot marry you and my heart belongs to another." The humiliation hit Clara like a physical blow to the stomach. It was not just the rejection. It was the public nature of it. She could feel the eyes of the town crawling over her. "Poor thing," a woman whispered loudly behind her fan. "I told you he would never settle for the plain one." "Belle always gets what she wants." A man chuckled darkly. "Cannot blame him. Look at the difference." Belle smiled at Clara, a smile devoid of sisterhood. "Do not look so stricken. Clara, you are free now. You were never cut out to be a rancher's wife. You are too soft, Mrs." Cartwright let out a low moan and slumped into a chair, fanned rapidly by Dr. Miller. But Clara did not look at her mother. She looked at Thomas, the man who was supposed to be her future. He was staring at Belle's neckline, avoiding Clara's gaze entirely. He was a coward. The realization burned hotter than the shame. "You deserve each other," Clara said. Her voice was shaking, but it was audible. She turned on her heel. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, but out of the awkward desire to avoid contamination. She was the rejected one, the failure. "Run along, Clara," Belle called out, her voice sharp and gay. "We will send you a piece of the cake." Laughter. Someone laughed. That sound broke the last of Clara's composure. She picked up her skirts and ran. She burst through the double doors of the town hall and into the night. The cool air hit her face, but it did not cool the burning of her skin. She ran past the livery stable, past the saloon where the piano player had paused his tune to listen to the gossip spreading from the hall. She did not stop. She could hear the voices in her head, a chorus of every insecurity she had ever buried. Nothing special, plain, an arrangement, unwanted. She ran until the lights of the town faded behind her. She was on the trail leading out toward the canyonlands, a path of packed dirt and loose shale. One of her shoes caught on a root, and the strap snapped. She kicked it off. A moment later, she kicked off the other one. She ran in her stocking feet, the stones bruising her soles. The pain welcome because it was real. She finally stopped near a cluster of mesquite bushes, her chest heaving, her lungs burning. She bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. The silence of the prairie was immense, indifferent to her small tragedy. "Well, look what we have here." The voice was slurred, heavy with whiskey and malice. Clara straightened up, her heart skipping a beat. 3 men emerged from the shadows of a dry creek bed. They were rough-looking sorts, likely railroad workers or drift cowboys who had spent their wages on cheap liquor instead of attending the dance. "It is the Cartwright girl," the second man said, stepping into a patch of moonlight. He had a gap in his front teeth and a hat pulled low. "The one who just got thrown over. News travels fast." The third man laughed. He held a bottle in one hand and wiped his mouth with the back of the other. "We heard about it. Your sister snatched the prize right out from under you, did she not?" "Let me pass," Clara said, trying to summon the authority she used on drunk patrons at the boarding house. "I am going home." "Home is that way, darling," the first man said, pointing back toward the town lights. "You are headed out to the coyotes. Or maybe you are looking for someone to comfort you." He stepped closer, the smell of rot-gut whiskey wafting off him. Clara took a step back, but her heel hit a rock. "Leave me alone," she warned, though her voice trembled. "Now, do not be high and mighty," the man sneered. He lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. His grip was hard, his fingers digging into her skin. "You are damaged goods now. Sweetheart, the fiancé turned loose. That means you are free for the taking. Right, no one claims you." "Let go!" Clara screamed, swinging her free hand. She struck his shoulder, but it only made him laugh. "Feisty. Maybe that Thomas fellow was a fool. I like a woman who fights a little." He yanked her toward him. Clara stumbled, falling to her knees in the dirt. The sharp stones tore through her dress. The other 2 men circled closer, jeering. "Check her pockets," the gap-toothed man said. "Maybe she has some of that wedding money on her." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the violence, for the final indignity of a night that had already taken everything from her. Thud. It was a heavy, meaty sound, followed by a grunt of surprise. The grip on her wrist vanished. Clara opened her eyes. A horse had appeared out of the darkness as if materialized from the shadows themselves. It was a paint horse, powerful and sleek, and on its back sat the warrior, Tahan. He did not yell. He did not make a war cry. He simply guided the massive animal sideways, the horse's shoulders slamming into the man who had held Clara with the force of a falling boulder. The man was thrown backward, landing 10 feet away in the dust, wheezing for breath. The other 2 men froze, their drunken haze pierced by primal fear. Tahan sat high above them. In the moonlight, the silver conchos on his saddle gleamed. He held a bow in his left hand, an arrow already nocked, the string drawn back to his cheek. He did not aim at their chests. He aimed at the ground. Thwip! The arrow struck the earth less than an inch from the gap-toothed man's boot. The vibration of the shaft hummed in the sudden silence. "Next one is for the knee," Tahan said. His voice was deep, rough like gravel rolling in a stream bed. He spoke English, but the cadence was slow, deliberate. The men scrambled back, tripping over themselves. "It is the ghost," one of them yelped. "Let us go! Let us go!" They dragged their fallen comrade up and ran, stumbling and cursing, disappearing into the darkness back toward the safety of the town lights. Silence returned to the prairie, heavier than before. Clara remained on the ground, shivering violently. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving her cold and hollow. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring up at the man on the horse. He eased the tension on the bowstring and slid the arrow back into the quiver on his back. Then, with a fluid grace, he dismounted. He landed softly, his moccasins making no sound on the hard earth. He walked toward her. Clara flinched, instinctively pulling back. He stopped, He stood 6 feet away, giving her space. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face composed of sharp angles and copper skin illuminated by the moon. He untied a wool blanket from behind his saddle and held it out to her. He did not throw it. He did not force it on her. He simply held it, waiting. Clara slowly reached out and took the blanket. It smelled of wood smoke, horse, and sage. She wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling it tight to cover her torn dress. Tahan watched her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but they lacked the cruelty she had seen in Thomas, in Belle, in the men on the trail. He looked at her torn dress, her bleeding knees, her stocking feet. But it was not a look of inspection. It was a look of recognition. He saw the wound, not the shame. "They are gone," he said. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Her voice broke on the second word. "You have no shoes," he stated. It was not a question. "I lost them," she said. "I ran." He nodded once, as if this made perfect sense. "The town is loud tonight. Too many lies." Clara looked up at him, startled. "You saw?" "I see many things," Tahan replied. He gestured toward the horse. "Can you walk?" Clara tried to stand, but her legs were like water. She swayed, and for a moment, she thought she would fall again. Tahan moved. He was beside her in an instant, his hand steadying her elbow. His grip was firm but careful, nothing like the crushing grasp of the drunkard. His hand felt warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "Lean," he instructed. Clara leaned against him. He was solid as a rock wall. "I cannot go back there," she said, panic rising in her chest. "Not yet, please." "I know," Tahan said. He did not put her on the horse. Instead, he walked beside her, leading the paint horse with one hand and supporting her with the other. He led her away from the main trail, skirting the edge of the town, moving through the brush with a silence that made Clara feel loud and clumsy. They walked for 20 minutes until the lights of Lone Mesa were just aglow on the horizon. He stopped near the old water tower, a structure that marked the very boundary between the settlement and the wild. "Here it is safe," Tahan said. "They do not come this far in the dark. They are afraid of the shadows." Clara leaned against one of the wooden posts of the tower. She pulled the blanket tighter. "Why did you help me?" she asked. They say you hate us." Tahan looked at the town lights, then turned his gaze back to her. "Hate is a white man's word. It is too simple." He paused, studying her face. "You are the one from the well, the one who works while others sleep." Clara nodded, surprised he remembered. "Why did they hurt you inside the big house?" he asked. "My sister," Clara said, the bitterness coating her tongue. "She took the man I was to marry. And the man, he let her. They made me a fool in front of everyone." Tahan made a low sound in his throat, something between a grunt and a growl. "A man who breaks a promise is worth less than the dust under a hoof. You lost nothing of value." The words were blunt, stripped of all the polite sugar-coating her mother would have used. And because of that, they felt true. "I have nowhere to go," Clara admitted, the despair washing over her again. "I have to go back to that house. I have to serve them breakfast tomorrow." "Then go back," Tahan said. "But do not go back to the dog that was kicked. Go back as the wolf that survived the trap." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. But again, she felt no fear. He reached out and, with a single finger, tilted her chin up until she was forced to look him in the eye. "Listen to me, woman of the well," he said softly. "No one touches you when I am here. Do you understand?" The promise hung in the air, heavy and absolute. It was not a vow of love. They were strangers. It was a vow of protection, born of some warrior's code she did not understand but desperately needed. "I understand," Clara breathed. He dropped his hand. "Keep the blanket. The night is cold." He swung himself onto his horse with a fluid motion. He looked down at her one last time, in the moonlight. His face was stark, beautiful in a terrifying way. "I am Tahan," he said. "I am Clara," she replied. He nodded. He turned the horse toward the open prairie, toward the darkness where the coyotes sang. "Clara," he repeated, testing the sound of it. Then he kicked the horse into a gallop and vanished into the night, leaving Clara standing in the dust. She touched her cheek where his finger had rested. She was shivering, but not from the cold. She looked back at the town. She was disgraced. She was alone, but she was alive. And somewhere in the vast, empty dark, a wolf was watching over her. Clara tightened the Comanche blanket around her shoulders. She took a breath, wiped the tears from her face, and began the long, barefoot walk back to the boarding house. She will serve breakfast tomorrow, but she would not serve it with a smile. She would serve it with the silence of the desert. Her life as a bride was over. Her life as a woman was just beginning. The sun rose over Lone Mesa the next morning with a cruel brightness, illuminating every whisper and sidelong glance that filled the dusty streets. Gossip in a frontier town traveled faster than a brush fire, and by the time the church bell rang 7 times, the verdict was in. Isabel Cartwright was the victor, a woman of passion who had seized her destiny. Clara Cartwright was the refuse, the discarded thing, the spinster in waiting who had been too dull to keep a man. Thomas Hale wasted no time in cementing the narrative. Before noon, he stood on the steps of the general store, his arm draped possessively around Belle's waist. He announced to anyone who would listen that the wedding would proceed next month. But with the correct sister, he spoke of true love and the courage to admit a mistake, painting himself not as a breaker of oaths, but as a man of integrity. Clara heard it all from the kitchen window of the boarding house. She kept her hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing the breakfast plates until her knuckles turned white. "Just keep your head down, Mrs." Cartwright said, bustling through the kitchen with a tray of biscuits. She refused to meet Clara's eyes. "People will talk for a week, and then something else will happen. Someone will get shot, or the train will derail, and they will forget." "They will not forget, Mother," Clara said quietly. "I am the joke of the county." "Oh, you have a roof over your head," her mother snapped, though her voice wavered with guilt. "Endure it. What choice do you have?" Clara did not answer. She dried her hands and walked into the dining room to clear the tables. The room went silent the moment she entered. Men who had known her since she was a child suddenly found the contents of their coffee cups fascinating. At the main table, Thomas sat with the railroad representative, a man named Mr. Sterling. Thomas looked different today. He sat straighter, his chest puffed out, trying to fill the space of a man who made difficult decisions. "The survey lines are clear," Mr. Sterling was saying, tracing a line on a map spread out between the bacon and eggs. "We need to secure the river basin. That water is essential for the steam engines." "That is Comanche land," an older rancher muttered. "By treaty." "Treaties are paper," Thomas declared loudly, glancing around to make sure he was being heard. "Progress is iron. We cannot let a handful of savages stand in the way of civilization. They are nothing but obstacles, like stumps in a field that need to be pulled." Clara froze, a stack of dirty plates in her hands. She looked at Thomas. This was the man who had held her hand on the porch swing and talked about raising sheep now, desperate to impress the railroad money. He spoke of extermination with the casual arrogance of a king. A wave of revulsion washed over her, so strong she nearly dropped the china. She walked back to the kitchen, her heart pounding. Thomas was not just weak, he was dangerous. A weak man with power was like a loaded gun in the hands of a child, miles away, on the ridge that overlooked the winding snake of the river. Tahan sat on his paint horse. He was alone. The council of elders had sent him to watch the spider web makers, the men who laid the iron rails. He saw the wooden stakes with red flags driven into the earth. They cut straight through the valley, heading toward the box canyon where the ancestors of his band were buried on scaffolding high in the rocks. He should have felt only anger, but his mind drifted back to the night before. He thought of the woman with the tea-colored eyes and the torn dress, the woman who had not screamed when he approached. "Why do you think of her?" he asked himself. She is one of them. Her skin is the color of the enemy, but he remembered her hands. They were rough, like his own, hands that knew work, hands that had been empty when they should have been full. He turned his horse away from the river, a strange heaviness in his chest. Later that afternoon, the heat broke slightly, and the town market bustled with activity. Clara was sent to buy flour and sugar. She walked with her head high, ignoring the titters of two young girls by the milliner's shop. "Look, it is the leftover bride," one whispered. Clara tightened her grip on her basket and turned the corner toward the trading post. There, the crowd had parted, leaving a wide circle around a wagon. Tahan stood by his horse. He had come to trade tanned deer hides and buffalo robes. He stood motionless, his face a mask of impassive stone. The owner of the trading post, a man named Silas, was haggling with him, shouting slowly and loudly as if Tahan were deaf or simple. "I said, $2 for the lot," Silas yelled, holding up 2 fingers. "You understand, 2, not 3. The men gathered around laughed. "Careful, Silas, do not tax his brain too much," one jeered. "He might scalp you if he gets confused." Tahan did not blink. He understood every word. He knew Silas was cheating him. The furs were worth $10 in St. Louis, but he needed ammunition and salt. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd. She saw the dignity in Tahan's posture, the way he refused to lower himself to their level of petty cruelty. And then he looked up. His eyes found hers instantly. It was as if a string connected them. The noise of the market faded. In his gaze, she saw no judgment about her broken engagement. She saw only recognition. He saw her standing on the outside, just as he was standing on the outside. He gave the slightest nod. Clara felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. She wanted to shout at Silas. She wanted to tell them all that this savage spoke better English than half the drunks in the saloon. But fear held her tongue. She hurried past, ducking into the general store, hating herself for her silence. An hour later, the church bell rang, summoning the town to a town hall meeting about the railroad expansion. Everyone was going. It was the future of Lone Mesa. Clara walked toward the church, carrying her heavy sack of flour. As she passed the alleyway between the livery stable and the blacksmith, she saw a shadow move. Tahan was there. He was not in the meeting. Of course, he was standing in the gloom, listening to the voices drifting from the open church windows. He was trying to understand the fate being decided for his people. Clara stopped. She looked at the church doors, where Thomas and Belle were entering, arm in arm, beaming like royalty. Then she looked at the solitary figure in the alley, for the first time in her life. Clara Cartwright disobeyed the rules of survival. She did not keep her head down. She changed course, walking straight into the alley. Tahan tensed as she approached, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt, then relaxing when he recognized her. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in the narrow space. "You are listening to them?" Clara whispered, glancing back at the street to ensure they were not seen. "Do you know what they are saying?" "I hear words," Tahan said. "Water, iron, progress." "It is not just water," Clara said urgently. She stepped closer, the smell of flour and sweat mixing with the scent of leather and sage. "They are planning to route the tracks through the Red Rock Canyon. Mr. Sterling, the railroad man, says it is the only flat grade to the river." Tahan went very still. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. "Red Rock. Yes, is that important?" Tahan looked past her, his eyes dark with a sudden, ancient pain. "It is where we lay our dead. The scaffolds are there. If the iron snake goes there, it'll knock the bones to the ground." Clara gasped. "They do not know, or they do not care." "They will care," Tahan said. His voice was devoid of threat, which made it terrifying. It was a statement of fact. "If they touch the sleepers, the arrows will fly. The peace will end." "Thomas called you obstacles," Clara blurted out. "He wants to clear you out." Tahan looked down at her. "Thomas is the man who threw you away." "Yes, he is a man who fears his own shadow," Tahan said. "But scared men start big fires." He stepped closer, looking intently at her. "Why do you tell me this? You are from the town." "I do not know." Clara admitted, her voice shaking. Maybe because I am tired of lies. Maybe because... She trailed off, then found her courage. Because you helped me when my own people laughed. Tahan studied her face, memorizing the lines of worry and the spark of defiance in her tea-colored eyes. The land remembers blood. Clara, he said. Yours, mine. When it hits the dirt, all blood is red. Do not forget that. He turned and melted into the shadows behind the blacksmith's shop, vanishing as if he had never been there. Clara stood alone in the alley, the sack of flour heavy in her arms, the weight of the secret war heavy in her heart. That evening, supper at the boarding house was a celebration. Thomas and Belle held court at the head of the table. Belle was glowing, wearing a new brooch that Thomas had bought her. We are thinking of a spring wedding, Belle announced, buttering a roll. And we will expand the ranch house. Thomas says we will be the richest family in the territory once the train comes through. To Thomas and Isabel, Mr. Sterling toasted. And what about you, Clara? Belle asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She looked down the table to where Clara was eating silently. What will you do? I suppose you can stay on here and help Mother. Every house needs a spinster aunt to knit socks. Thomas laughed. It was a weak, braying sound. Now, Belle, be kind. Clara is sturdy. She will find a widower, perhaps, someone who needs a nurse. Or she can just be the widow of the living. Belle giggled. The nickname hung in the air, cruel and sticky. The woman whose husband is alive but dead to her. The table erupted in laughter. Even Mrs. Cartwright offered a weak, apologetic smile, trying to keep the peace. Clara set her fork down. The metal clinked loudly against the china. She looked at Belle, beautiful and venomous. She looked at Thomas, weak and puffed up with borrowed power. She looked at the walls of the boarding house, the wallpaper she had stared at for 20 years. It was a cage, a comfortable, well-fed cage, but a cage nonetheless. She thought of the alleyway. She thought of the copper-skinned man who spoke of blood and memory. He was dangerous. He was an outcast, but when he looked at her, he saw her. Not a servant, not a mistake. I am done, Clara said. Done with supper, Mrs. Cartwright asked nervously. Done, Clara repeated. She stood up. Excuse me. She walked out of the room, her back straight. She climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves. She did not cry. She was done crying. She went to the window and looked out toward the west, toward the canyon lands where the bones of the ancestors lay. The moon was rising, bathing the prairie in silver. She could stay here. She could scrub floors and endure Belle's taunts and fade into the wallpaper until she was a ghost in her own life. It was safe. It was certain. Or she could listen to the voice that had whispered in the dark. Do not go back as the dog that was kicked. The decision did not come as a lightning bolt. It came as a slow, steady hardening of her spirit. She touched the glass of the window pane. All blood is red, she whispered to the night. The war was coming. The railroad was coming. And Clara Cartwright realized with a start that she was standing on the wrong side of the battle lines. She did not belong to the town anymore. She belonged to the truth, even if that truth was riding a paint horse into the wilderness. The wagon train was meant to be a short run to the outpost at Willow Creek, a 2-day journey to deliver flour and coffee. Clara had volunteered not for the money, but for the silence. The air in Lone Mesa had become unbreathable, thick with the pity of her neighbors and the triumphant laughter of her sister. She needed the horizon, but the horizon had betrayed them. The storm did not creep up. It fell upon them like a collapsing mountain. One moment, the sky was a bruised purple. The next, the world was nothing but screaming wind and red dust. The sand was not just in the air. It was a physical weight, scouring paint from wood and skin from bone. "Hold the line!" the wagon master screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the gale. Clara sat in the back of the third wagon, clutching a 7-year-old boy named Timothy to her chest. Timothy was the son of the blacksmith, sent to visit his aunt. He was sobbing, his small hands gripping Clara's shawl with terrified strength. "Hush now!" Clara shouted into his ear, though she could barely hear herself. Stay low. The wagon lurched violently. The lead mule had panicked. Through the swirling red darkness, Clara saw the outrider, the hired guide, thrown from his horse. He vanished into the dust before he even hit the ground. The wagon tipped. Wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Clara was thrown clear, landing hard on the unforgiving earth. The wind knocked the breath from her lungs. She scrambled on her hands and knees, blind and deafened. "Timothy!" she screamed. A small hand grabbed her ankle. She pulled the boy to her, shielding his face with her body. The sand stung like 1,000 wasps. They were alone. The wagon train was gone, swallowed by the chaos. They were two specks of life in a world intent on erasing them. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had no meaning in the red dark. Clara's throat was parched, her eyes gritty and swollen. She felt the cold creep of hypothermia beneath the heat of the storm. Then, a shadow solidified out of the wind. It was not a mule. It was a horse, standing steady against the gale as if it were made of stone. A hand reached down a hand she knew. "Take my arm," the voice rumbled, deeper than the thunder. Clara looked up. Tahan's face was wrapped in a scarf, leaving only his eyes visible, those dark, intense eyes that had watched her from the ridge. She reached up. Tahan's grip was iron. He hauled her and Timothy up onto the paint horse in one fluid motion. He placed the boy between them and Clara behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. "Hold tight," he commanded. They rode through the teeth of the storm. Tahan did not fight the wind. He navigated it. He seemed to sense the shifts in the earth, the hidden ravines. Other shadows appeared around them, 3 other warriors, silent ghosts flanking their leader. They descended into a cut in the earth, a narrow fissure that widened into a deep box canyon. As they went lower, the wind died away, blocked by the towering red walls. The air became still. Tahan halted the horse near a small stream that cut through the canyon floor. He slid off and helped Clara down. "Safe," he said. Clara's legs gave way, but he caught her. For a moment, she was pressed against his chest, smelling the leather of his vest and the rain scent of his skin. "You found us," she whispered, her voice raspy. "I saw the dust rise," Tahan said simply. "The earth told me you were in trouble." The canyon was a sanctuary. A small camp was set up, a few hide tents, a fire pit dug deep to hide the glow. This was not a war camp. It was a hidden place, a sacred pocket of the land. Over the next 3 days, Clara ceased to be the spinster of Lone Mesa. She became something new. She did not sit idly by while the Comanche men worked. When Tahan brought in a deer, Clara rolled up her sleeves. She helped skin it, her hands bloody and efficient. She gathered wood for the fire. She used the last of her clean petticoats to bind the twisted ankle of one of the younger warriors. She watched Tahan. In the town, they called him a savage, a killer. But here, she saw him lift Timothy onto his shoulders to cross the stream so the boy's boots would not get wet. She saw him offer the best cut of meat to an elderly warrior who had lost his teeth. She saw him touch the earth with reverence before he drank from the river. He was a king without a crown. On the 3rd night, the fire crackled low. Timothy was asleep in one of the tents. Clara sat on a flat rock, staring into the flames. Tahan sat opposite her, sharpening a knife with a rhythmic shk-shk sound. "Your hands are healing," Tahan said, looking at her knuckles. "They are tougher than they look," Clara replied. "I had a wife once." Tahan said. The words were sudden, dropped into the silence like stones into a pool. Her name was Morning Lark. She died when the soldiers moved us from the high plains. The fever took her. Clara looked at him, her heart aching for the sorrow in his voice. "I am sorry. Tahan, I truly am. I lost my future that day." Tahan continued, testing the blade's edge with his thumb. "I thought the world was finished." "I know the feeling," Clara said softly. "I did not lose a life, but I lost the life I was supposed to have. I thought I was building a home. Turns out I was just waiting to be evicted." Tahan looked up, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "A house is just wood. Clara, A home is where you are respected. Do you feel respected in Lone Mesa? No, she admitted. I feel like furniture. Here, you are not furniture. Tahan said, You are fired. You keep us warm. The compliment was so simple, so direct, that Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the heat of the fire. The next morning, the intimacy shifted from emotional to physical. You ride like a sack of flour, Tahan told her as they prepared to scout the canyon rim. I ride like a lady, Clara retorted, though she smiled. Side saddle. Side saddle is for people who want to fall off, Tahan said. You ride astride, like a warrior. He lifted her onto the paint horse. He adjusted her legs, his hands warm and firm on her calves. He stood close to the horse, his hand resting on her thigh to steady her. Grip with your knees, he instructed. Move with the beast, not against him. He swung up behind her, his chest pressed against her back. His arms came around her to hold the reins. Clara could feel the solid wall of his muscles, the steady thrum of his heart. His breath was warm on the nape of her neck, sending shivers down her spine that made her toes curl. It was practical. It was a lesson. But the air between them was thick with unsaid things. Every shift of the horse threw them together. Every time he leaned forward to point out a landmark, his cheek brushed her hair. It was a torture and a delight. That afternoon, trouble arrived. A scout rode into the canyon, his horse lathered with sweat. He spoke rapidly in Comanche, gesturing wildly toward the north. Clara watched Tahan's face. It hardened into granite. He asked a sharp question. The scout answered, spitting on the ground. Tahan turned to Clara. What is it? She asked, fear clutching her stomach. You're Thomas, Tahan said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. And the railroad man. They are planning a raid. A raid on the town. No, a raid on a ranch, the Miller homestead. Tahan explained grimly. They will burn it tonight. They will kill the cattle. And they will leave Comanche arrows at the scene. Clara gasped. To blame you to get the army to attack? Yes, they want a war so they can clear the land for the tracks. Clara felt a nausea that was almost blinding. Thomas. Her name is Thomas. He was not just weak, he was evil. He was willing to burn his neighbors and start a slaughter just to prove he was powerful. I will take you back to the main road, Tahan said, moving to saddle his horse. You and the boy. You can walk to town from the crossroads. You will be safe before the fighting starts. No, Clara said. Tahan stopped. He turned slowly. No. I am not going back, Clara said, her voice trembling but her chin high. If I go back, who will tell the truth? They will say you did it. No one will believe a savage. And they will believe you. I am a Cartwright, Clara said, and I speak their language. I know how they think. I can translate. I can testify. If you go alone, they will shoot you on sight. If I am with you, maybe they will hesitate. It is dangerous, Tahan warned. This is not a game. Clara, this is blood. I told you. Clara stepped closer to him. I am done being safe. I want to be right. Tahan looked at her for a long minute. He searched her face for fear and found only resolve. A slow, fierce pride dawned in his eyes. Come, he said. He led her up a narrow goat path to a high precipice overlooking the vast, rolling plains. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a violent canvas of bruised purple and bleeding orange. The wind whipped at Clara's skirts and Tahan's long hair. They stood on the edge of the world. Tahan reached into a small leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out something that caught the dying light. It was a ring, not a delicate gold band like the one Thomas had given her. This was silver, hammered rough and thick, set with a piece of turquoise as blue as the summer sky. It was heavy, it was real. He took her hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, over the pale band of skin where Thomas's ring had once sat. The man in the town, Tahan said softly. He looked at you and saw a servant. He saw a shadow. He stepped closer. There was no space left between them. The wind roared, but Clara could hear his breathing as if it were her own. I see you, Clara, Tahan said. I see the woman who carries children through storms. I see the woman who stands in alleys to warn her enemy. I see the fire. He slid the silver ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her hand. Belle stole your promise, Tahan whispered, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. I offer mine, with all my eyes I can say, with all my heart can hold. Tahan, Clara breathed. I cannot promise you a big house, he said. I cannot promise you safety. I can only promise you this: you will never be invisible again. Not to me. Clara looked down at the ring. It felt warm against her skin. It felt like an anchor, not a shackle. She looked up at him. I do not want a big house. Tahan, I want a life. She did not pull her hand away. She pressed it against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the strong, steady beat of it. Then stay, he said. Stay and fight beside me. I am staying, she promised. They did not kiss. The moment was too big, too fragile for that. Instead, Tahan leaned his forehead against hers. They stood there on the cliff edge, two outcasts silhouetted against the burning sky, bound together by silver and danger. That night, back in the canyon, the air was charged with a different kind of electricity. The impending battle hung over them, but so did the promise made on the cliff. Clara lay on her bedroll near the fire. Tahan lay only 2 feet away. The other warriors were asleep, but Clara knew Tahan was awake. She could feel his gaze on her back. She turned over. He was watching her, the firelight turning his skin to bronze. Are you afraid? He asked softly. Yes, Clara admitted, but not of the fighting. Of what then? Of waking up and finding out this was a dream, she whispered. Tahan reached out across the space between them. He took her hand, the one with the silver ring. He did not pull her closer. He just held her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It is not a dream, he said. Dreams fade when the sun rises. This will not. The heat of his hand traveled up her arm, warming her entire body. It was a chaste touch, yet it was more intimate than anything she had ever experienced. It was a claim. It was a vow. They fell asleep like that, holding hands across the gap between their bedrolls, a bridge built between two worlds. Tomorrow, there will be fire and bullets. Tomorrow, Clara would have to face the man she was supposed to marry and the sister who had betrayed her. But tonight, she wore the ring of a Comanche warrior, and for the first time in her life, Clara Cartwright fell asleep knowing exactly who she was. She was not the woman left behind. She was the woman who had been chosen. The return to Lone Mesa was not a quiet affair. There was no slipping in through the back alleys or hiding in the shadows this time. It was high noon, and the sun beat down on the main street with the force of a hammer, bleaching the color from the wooden storefronts and turning the dust to blinding white powder. They rode in a column of 6. Tahan rode at the front on his paint horse, his spine stiff as a lance, his face painted with a single stripe of black ash across the eyes. Flanking him were 4 warriors, armed with bows and rifles, their expressions unreadable. And beside Tahan, riding astride with her skirts hiked up and her hair wind-blown and tangled, was Clara Cartwright. The sight of them stopped the town dead. The blacksmith dropped his hammer. The piano in the saloon fell silent mid-chord. A woman sweeping the boardwalk froze, her broom clattering to the planks. For 10 seconds, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of hooves on packed land and the creak of saddle leather. Then, chaos erupted. "Comanche!" someone screamed from the balcony of the hotel. "Raid! It is a raid!" "Get the rifles!" another voice bellowed. Men scrambled out of the saloon, fumbling with holster flaps. Mothers snatched children from the street, dragging them indoors and slamming shutters. The church bell began to clang, a frantic, discordant alarm that shattered the heavy heat of the afternoon. "Stay close," Tahan said to Clara, his voice low and steady amidst the rising panic. He did not reach for his weapon. He kept his hands visible on the reins, a deliberate signal that was likely to be ignored by terrified men. "I am not going anywhere," Clara replied. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands on the reins were steady. She saw the faces of people she had known all her life, Mr. Henderson, the grocer, Miss Gable, the schoolteacher, twisted into masks of fear and hatred. At the far end of the street, near the church, a group of men poured out of the mayor's office. Thomas Hale was among them, along with Mr. Sterling, the railroad representative. Isabel stood on the steps, shading her eyes against the glare. "Hold fire!" Mayor Higgins shouted, waving his arms. "Hold fire! They are not attacking yet." The Comanche group halted in the center of the town square, a dusty patch of ground between the church, the jail, and the boarding house. They were immediately surrounded. 20 men with Winchesters and Colts formed a jagged circle, their fingers twitching on triggers. Thomas Hale pushed his way to the front. His face was pale, sweating profusely, but his eyes darted with a mixture of fear and opportunism. "You see?" Thomas shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the group. I told you they would come. They have come to burn us out." Mr. Sterling stepped up beside him, cool and composed in his linen suit. "Gentlemen, steady your aim. This is the aggression we warned you about. These savages do not understand treaties. They only understand force." "Clara," Belle's voice cut through the tension. She ran down the steps, clutching her shawl as if she were cold. Despite the heat, she stopped behind Thomas, peering out with wide, theatrical eyes. "Oh, heavens! Clara! What have they done to you, Thomas? Look, they have taken her hostage." "I am not a hostage," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but in the sudden hush that followed Belle's scream, it carried to every corner of the square. She swung her leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground. Dust puffed around her boots. She stood tall, brushing the dirt from her skirt. She did not look like the meek boarding house girl anymore. She looked like the land itself, worn, enduring, and fierce. "Clara, get away from him," Thomas commanded, trying to sound authoritative. "Come here. We will protect you. You have been corrupted. We know what these animals do to white women." "Corrupted," Clara laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "You speak of corruption. Thomas, you, who shakes hands with men who plan murder." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. "She is hysterical," Sterling said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. "The sun and the trauma. Someone grab her." "Do not touch her," Tahan said. He did not shout. He did not have to. The deep timbre of his voice vibrated in the air. He sat on his horse, looking down at the railroad man with eyes that were ancient and cold. "The woman speaks with her own tongue. Let her speak." "This is a trick," Thomas yelled, sensing the mood shifting. He turned to the crowd, desperation creeping into his tone. "Look at her. She rides with them. She dresses like them. She has turned against her own kind. She is selling our secrets to the enemy because she is jealous that I chose Isabel." "Is that true, Clara?" Mayor Higgins asked, stepping forward nervously. "Are you a traitor to Lone Mesa?" Clara walked to the center of the square. She stood between the horses and the guns. She looked at the mayor. She looked at the doctor. She looked at the faces of the boarders she had fed for 10 years. "I am no traitor," Clara said. "But there are traitors here, and they are wearing fine suits." She pointed a finger at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling and Thomas Hale sat in my dining room 3 days ago. They looked at maps. I heard them, and I know what they planned for tonight." "Lies!" Thomas shrieked. "She is mad with grief. They plan to ride to the Miller homestead tonight," Clara continued, raising her voice over Thomas's protests. "They plan to burn the barn and kill the livestock. And they plan to leave Comanche arrows at the scene." The crowd gasped. Heads turned toward Old Man Miller, who was standing near the livery stable, gripping a pitchfork. "Burn my place," Miller growled. "Why?" "Because they need a war," Clara said. "If the army comes to fight the Comanche, the railroad gets the land for free. They get the canyon. They get the water rights. Thomas wants the grazing land, and Mr. Sterling wants the tracks laid without paying for the treaty rights." "This is preposterous," Sterling scoffed, though a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The words of a scorned woman and a savage against a representative of the Union Pacific. "It is not just her word," a voice said from the porch of the boarding house. Mrs. Cartwright stepped out. She looked terrified. Her hands were twisting her apron into knots, but she walked down the steps and stood on the boardwalk. "Mother, go inside," Belle hissed. "Mrs." Cartwright ignored her. She looked at Clara, seeing the bruises, the sunburn, and the undeniable strength in her daughter's posture. "The night Clara ran away," Mrs. Cartwright said, her voice trembling. "I saw her come back. I saw the bruises on her arms from where those drunks grabbed her, and I saw who brought her back. It was him." She pointed at Tahan. "He brought her to the edge of town and let her go. If he wanted to hurt us, he could have done it then. He saved her. He saved her to use her," Thomas argued. "It is a long con." Tahan dismounted. The movement was fluid, like water flowing over rock. The men raised their rifles, but Tahan ignored them. He walked to his saddlebags and pulled out a heavy burlap sack. He walked to the center of the square, past Clara, and stopped in front of the mayor. He upended the sack. Objects clattered onto the dusty ground. There were bundles of arrows, but the fletching was wrong. It was turkey feather, not hawk, tied with red thread. There were branding irons that had been filed down, and there were heavy iron spikes, the kind used to secure rails. These were found on the land of my fathers. Tahan said he kicked one of the arrows with his moccasin. "Clumsy work. These are not Comanche arrows. The knots are tied by white hands. And these," he pointed to a leather pouch that had spilled open, revealing coins and a flask. "These belong to the man who rides guard for the railroad. We found them where they camped to watch the Miller Ranch." Mayor Higgins knelt down. He picked up the flask. He turned it over. "This has the initials J.D. carved in it. Jack Doyle. He works for you. Mr. Sterling." Sterling's composure cracked. "Doyle is a drunkard. I cannot control where he loses his property." "You paid him," Clara said. $200. I heard you say the number. $200 to start a war that would kill innocent people. To kill Mr. Miller's family. To kill my family." The mood in the square shifted violently. The rifles that had been aimed at the Comanche lowered, then slowly began to turn toward the steps where Thomas and Sterling stood. "Now hold on," Thomas stammered, backing up until he bumped into Belle. "You cannot believe this. She is jealous. She hates Belle for being beautiful. She hates me for being a man of status." Belle stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "It is true. She has always hated me. She ran off with this wild man just to shame us. Look at her. She is dirty. She has slept with him. She is a fallen woman." The accusation hung in the hot air. In 1875, to be a fallen woman was a social death sentence. It was meant to be the final nail in Clara's coffin. The thing that would make the town turn their backs on her regardless of the truth. Clara looked at her sister. She saw the fear behind the beauty. She saw the emptiness. "Yes," Clara said softly. "I have slept on the earth. I have ridden through storms. I have sat by a fire and been treated with more respect by a warrior than I ever was by this town." She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small gold ring, the engagement ring Thomas had given her. "You speak of honor, Thomas," Clara said. "You threw me away because I was plain, because I was quiet. You wanted a decoration, not a wife." She threw the ring. It arced through the air, glinting in the sun, and landed in the dust at Thomas's feet. "Keep it," Clara said. "It is hollow, just like you." Then she raised her left hand. The sunlight caught the heavy silver band on her finger, the turquoise stone blazing like a piece of the sky itself. "I'm wearing this now," Clara declared. "I wear the promise of a man who sees me, a man who does not hide behind lies." Thomas's face turned a mottled purple. You traitoress!" He lunged forward, raising his hand as if to strike her, faster than thought. Tahan moved. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stepped between Clara and Thomas. He caught Thomas's wrist in midair. The impact made a sound like a cracking branch. Thomas yelped and dropped to his knees. His arm twisted painfully behind his back by the warrior's iron grip. Tahan looked down at him with utter disdain. Then he shoved Thomas away. Thomas sprawled in the dirt, scrambling backward, gasping. "Coward!" Tahan said. He turned his back on Thomas, the ultimate insult. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the mayor, the doctor, the shopkeepers. "I do not come to rob," Tahan said, his voice ringing out. "I do not come to kill. I come to say this. If blood spills on this ground, it will be because of your greed, not our savagery." He paused, and then he turned to Clara. The silence in the square was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tahan reached out and took Clara's hand. He did not care about the eyes watching. He did not care about the rifles or the whispers. "They say I am your enemy," Tahan said to the town, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "They say we cannot mix, that oil and water do not bind." He stepped closer to her. "I love this woman," Tahan stated. The words were simple, stripped of all poetry, yet heavier than the mountains. "I do not love her as a Comanche loves a white woman," he continued. "I do not love her as a warrior loves a prize. I love her as a man loves a woman, human to human, spirit to spirit." He lifted Clara's hand and pressed it to his chest, over the beadwork of his vest. "She is my heart," Tahan said. "If you strike her, you strike me. If you hunt her, you hunt me. We are one." Belle let out a sob of rage and humiliation. "He has bewitched her, Thomas. Do something." But Thomas was cowering in the dust, clutching his wrist. Mr. Sterling was edging toward the alley, trying to slip away, only to find his path blocked by the blacksmith and two other large men. "I think you best stay right there, Mr. Sterling," the blacksmith said, crossing his massive arms. "We have some questions about those fire spikes." Mayor Higgins cleared his throat. He looked from the cowering Thomas to the proud, defiant couple standing in the sun. The choice was clear. It was not a choice between races. It was a choice between truth and falsehood. "Dr. Miller," the mayor said, "please examine that flask. If it matches the one Doyle carries, I want Mr. Sterling placed in the jailhouse until the marshal arrives." "And Thomas misses?" Cartwright asked, her voice sharp. "Thomas can go home," the mayor said coldly, "if he has a home left to go to. I do not think he will find much welcome in Lone Mesa after today." Thomas scrambled up, dusting off his suit, his face burning with shame. He looked at Belle, expecting her to comfort him. Belle looked at him sweaty, dirty, defeated, and curled her lip. She turned away. Thomas stood alone, a man who had gambled everything on vanity and lost. Tahan looked at Clara. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It is done," he said quietly. "Not quite," Clara said. She looked at her mother. "Mrs." Cartwright walked down the steps. She stopped in front of Tahan. She looked up at the tall warrior, this man she had been taught to fear her whole life. Then she looked at her daughter's hand, resting in his. "You kept her safe, Mrs.," Cartwright said. "When we did not, she keeps herself safe," Tahan replied. "I just walked beside her." "Mrs." Cartwright nodded slowly. She reached out and touched Clara's arm. "You have changed." "Clara." "I have, Mother. I cannot say I understand it." "Mrs.," Cartwright admitted, wiping a tear from her cheek. "And I cannot say it will be easy, but I see you. For the first time in a long time. I really see you." Clara leaned forward and kissed her mother's cheek. "Thank you." She turned back to Tahan. The town was still watching. There was still prejudice in many eyes, confusion in others. The road ahead would be hard. There would be cold winters and harsh words. But as she looked into Tahan's black eyes, she knew she would never face them alone again. "Let us go home," Clara said. "To the canyon?" Tahan asked. "To the horizon," Clara answered. Tahan lifted her onto the paint horse, then swung up behind her. The other warriors turned their mounts. They rode out of the square, past the church, past the fallen ring in the dust, and out toward the open prairie where the wind blew free. Behind them, the town of Lone Mesa erupted into shouting and arguments as the law descended on the railroad men. But Clara did not look back. She leaned against Tahan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, and watched the red earth stretch out before them, endless and waiting. The dust from the confrontation in the town square took 3 days to fully settle, both literally and metaphorically. Lone Mesa, once a sleepy outpost dreaming of iron rails and easy money, had woken up with a collective hangover. Mr. Sterling was gone. He had been escorted to the county line by the sheriff and a posse of unsmiling ranchers, his linen suit stained with sweat and his grand promises of a station depot evaporating like morning mist. The federal marshals in Austin had been telegrammed. It turned out that the government took a dim view of railroad agents inciting Indian wars to bypass federal treaties. The track construction halted 5 miles east. The wooden stakes pulled up and tossed into the brush. For now, the Red Rock Canyon and the sleeping ancestors within it remained undisturbed. For Thomas Hale, the fall was far less dignified than being escorted out of town. He remained in Lone Mesa, but he was a ghost haunting his own life. He walked into the saloon, and conversation died. He went to the bank, and the teller suddenly became very busy with ledgers. He had gambled his reputation on being the man who brought progress, and instead, he had been revealed as a man who would burn his neighbor's barn for a profit. Isabel Cartwright, now just belle to the town that whispered behind her back, found that her prize had lost all its luster. She walked beside Thomas down the boardwalk, her hand gripping his arm, not out of affection, but out of a desperate need to maintain appearances. "Stand up straight, Thomas," she hissed as they passed the general store. "You look like a beaten dog." "They are laughing at me. Belle," Thomas muttered, his eyes fixed on the dirt. "Do you hear them? They say I was bested by a savage. You were bested by your own stupidity." Belle snapped. She looked at the man she had stolen, the man she had staged a public scandal to claim. He was weak. His chin was weak. His moral character was weak. And now, even his social standing was crumbling. She had fought for a crown only to find it was made of painted tin, while the town simmered in its own juices. Clara Cartwright was fighting a different kind of battle inside the boarding house kitchen. It was late evening. The boarders had been fed a quiet, somber meal where no one mentioned the name Tahan, and Clara was drying the heavy iron skillet, Mrs. Cartwright sat at the small table, shelling peas with a mechanical rhythm. "You cannot marry him. Clara." "Mrs." Cartwright said. She did not look up. Her voice was tired, stripped of the frantic energy she had worn for years. "I am not asking for permission. Mother," Clara replied gently. She set the skillet down. "I am telling you what is in my heart. He is a Comanche." "Mrs." Cartwright said, the pod snapping in her fingers. "He lives in a tent. He hunts buffalo. He does not know how to sit in a parlor." "And Thomas knows how to sit in a parlor," Clara countered, turning to face her mother. "Thomas knows which fork to use. And Thomas was willing to kill Mr. Miller's family to get a better price for his cattle. Which one is the savage?" "Mother, Mrs." Cartwright stopped shelling. She looked at the pile of green peas in the bowl. "I just wanted you to be safe. I wanted you to have a life where you did not have to scrape grease off a griddle until your hands bled." "I know," Clara said. She pulled out a chair and sat opposite her mother. "But safety is not enough anymore. When I was out there, in the canyon, I was cold. Yes, the ground was hard. But when I spoke, he listened. When I worked, he thanked me. I was not just the girl who keeps the coffee pot full. I was Clara, Mrs." Cartwright looked up. Her eyes were wet. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw that the timid girl who had baked muffins and sewn hems was gone. In her place was a woman who wore a silver ring and carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had walked through a storm. "You love him, Mrs." Cartwright stated. It was not a question. "I do," Clara said. "He sees me, Mother, and I see him." 2 days later, a peace council was called. It was held not in the church, but in the open field behind the livery stable, a neutral ground between the town and the wild. Mayor Higgins sat on a crate, flanked by Dr. Miller and the sheriff. Opposite them sat Tahan and 2 elder warriors. They did not sit on crates. They sat cross-legged on buffalo robes they had spread on the grass. Clara stood between them. "Tell them," Tahan said in his deep, rolling voice, looking at the mayor, "that the railroad must stay east of the Sleeping Rocks. If they cross the river, the arrows will fly again." Clara turned to the mayor. He says the railroad must respect the boundary of the canyon. The burial grounds are sacred. If the tracks cross the river, there will be war. We cannot control the railroad forever, Mayor Higgins argued, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. They have lawyers. They have politicians, Clara translated. Tahan listened, his face impassive. Tell him, Tahan replied, that lawyers bleed just like soldiers. But tell him also that we have hides to trade. We have horses. We wish to trade with Lone Mesa, but only if the path is walked with honor. Clara relayed the message. The tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by the pragmatic language of commerce. The town needed trade. The Comanche needed goods, without the poisonous influence of Sterling and the desperation of Thomas. A fragile understanding began to form. Throughout the meeting, Tahan did not look at the mayor. He looked at Clara. He waited for her nod before he spoke. He waited for her translation before he reacted. It was a public display of trust that shocked the men of Lone Mesa more than any arrow. The savage was treating a woman as his voice, his equal. As the meeting broke up, the women of the town watched from the porches. They saw Clara standing tall in her simple cotton dress, the silver ring flashing in the sun. She held her own, the baker's wife murmured, standing right there between the mayor and the war chief. Takes a strong spine, another woman agreed. Stronger than some men we know. Clara walked back toward the boarding house, her head spinning with the exhaustion of diplomacy. She passed the small garden gate and found Belle waiting for her. Belle looked diminished. The red silk dress she wore seemed too bright, too desperate for a Tuesday afternoon. She was twisting a lace handkerchief in her hands, ruining the delicate fabric. "You enjoyed that, did you not?" Belle asked. Her voice lacked its usual venom. It sounded thin and brittle. "Standing there like a queen, giving orders to the mayor." "I was translating." "Belle," Clara said wearily. "I was trying to keep people from getting shot." "Thomas is leaving," Belle blurted out. "He says he might go to Santa Fe, start over. He wants me to go with him." "Do you want to go?" Clara asked. Belle looked at the boarding house, then at the dusty street. "He is what I won. Clara, if I do not go with him, then I just ruined everything for nothing. Did I not?" Clara looked at her sister with a sudden, piercing pity. Belle had treated life like a game of cards, thinking that if she stole the highest face card, she would win the pot. She had not realized that the game was rigged against her own happiness. "You did not ruin me, Belle," Clara said softly. Belle blinked, surprised. "I stole your fiancé. I humiliated you in front of the whole town." "You stole a man I did not love," Clara said. "You stole a life that would have suffocated me. You thought you were taking a prize, but you were just opening the cage door." Clara stepped closer and touched the silver ring on her finger. "You cannot steal what was not mine to begin with. Thomas belonged to his own vanity. Now he belongs to you. I hope you can find a way to be kind to each other." Belle's lip trembled. She looked at Clara, really looked at her, and saw the peace that radiated from her sister. It was a peace Belle had never known. Despite all her beauty and all her flirtations, "You are going with him, are you not?" Belle whispered. "With the Comanche. His name is Tahan," Clara said. "You are going to live in a tent," Belle said, trying to summon a sneer but failing. "I am going to live," Clara corrected. She walked past her sister and into the house. Belle stood alone by the gate, clutching her ruined handkerchief, realizing for the first time that she was the one who had been left behind. That evening, Tahan came to the back porch of the boarding house. He did not come to the front door that would be pushing the town's tolerance too fast, but he stood by the wood pile where Clara had spent so many mornings chopping kindling. Clara went out to meet him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a mirror of the night they had stood on the cliff. "The council went well," Tahan said. "Better than expected," Clara agreed. "Mayor Higgins is terrified of you, but he likes the idea of cheap buffalo hides." Tahan nodded. He looked out at the horizon, then turned his dark eyes to her. "My people will move to the winter camp soon. It is far. 3 days of riding. Clara felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. I see. I do not want you to live in a tent in the snow, Tahan said. It is a hard life. You are strong, but you are from the town. I am not from the town anymore, Clara said fiercely. Do not tell me where I belong. Tahan, I will not, Tahan said. A small smile touched his lips. I have a thought. A middle path. What middle path? There is a place, Tahan said, gesturing to the northwest, where the creek meets the old wagon road. It is on the edge of our land, but close to the white man's road. I wish to build a place there, a trading post, a house of wood. Not hide. Clara stared at him. A trading post. A bridge, Tahan corrected. I will hunt. I will bring the hides. You will trade. You will speak the words I cannot. We will live between the two worlds. Not fully Comanche, not fully white. Just us. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing the silver ring. Will you build this with me? Clara, it will be hard work, harder than this house. I am not afraid of work, Clara whispered. Her heart was soaring, beating against her ribs like a drum. I am afraid of empty rooms. I am afraid of silence. There will be no silence, Tahan promised. I have many stories, and I am learning more words every day. Then yes, Clara said. Yes. The decision was made, but the departure was the final hurdle. The next morning, Clara packed her trunk. It was light. She left behind the fancy linens, the heavy wool coats, the porcelain dolls from her childhood. She packed her sturdy work dresses, her sewing kit, her father's old Bible, and a bag of seed corn. She came down the stairs to find her mother standing in the hallway. Mrs. Cartwright looked older in the morning light, her hands clasped tight in front of her. You are going, Mrs. Cartwright said. I am going to the creek crossing, Clara said. We are going to build a trading post. I will not be gone forever. Mother, I will come back for supplies. You will see me, Mrs. Cartwright shook her head. It will not be the same. You are crossing a line, Clara. Once you go out there with him, you are not just my daughter anymore. You are the woman who chose the wild. I am choosing the man, Clara said firmly. I know. Mrs. Cartwright sighed. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She pressed it into Clara's hand. Clara unwrapped it. It was a small daguerreotype, a picture of her father and a jar of dried rosemary from the garden. Your father liked the wild, Mrs. Cartwright said, her voice thick with emotion. He always said the town was too loud. Maybe you are more like him than I thought. Mother, Clara started, tears pricking her eyes. Go, Mrs. Cartwright said, stepping back. She straightened her spine, regaining her composure. Go before I change my mind and lock you in the cellar. I do not want you to go. Clara, God knows I do not, but I want you to live, and I can see that you are dying here. She stepped forward one last time and hugged Clara hard. A fierce, desperate squeeze. Write to me, even if you have to send it by a circuit rider. I will, Clara promised. Clara walked out of the boarding house. She walked past the saloon where Thomas was drinking his breakfast. She walked past the church where she was supposed to have been married. She walked past the general store where Belle was buying a hat she did not need. She walked to the edge of town. Tahan was waiting. He was not on his horse. He was standing on the ground, holding the reins of the paint horse and a second horse, a sturdy mare saddled and ready. He did not say a word. He simply watched her walk toward him. As she got closer, the stern lines of his face softened. Clara stopped in front of him. She looked back at Lone Mesa one last time. It looked small. It looked like a toy town set down in the middle of a vast, indifferent ocean of grass. Ready? Tahan asked. Clara turned to him. She breathed in the scent of sage and dust. She felt the weight of the silver ring on her finger. Yes, she said. I am ready. She mounted the mare. Tahan swung onto his paint horse. Without a backward glance, they turned their horses toward the northwest, toward the creek. toward the horizon where the future was waiting to be built, one log and one day at a time. The town of Lone Mesa watched them go, and though some shook their heads and muttered about the folly of youth, others watched with a strange, quiet envy, wishing they too had the courage to ride away from the safety of the fence and into the wild, open world. The sun had not yet breached the horizon when Clara Cartwright stood in the hallway of the boarding house for the last time. The air was cool and smelled of stale tobacco smoke and floor wax, the scent of her confinement for the last 20 years. She carried a single leather satchel. Inside were 2 work dresses, a bag of seeds, her father's Bible, and a heavy quilt. She placed the iron ring of keys on the small table by the door. They made a dull clink, the sound of a jail cell opening. She did not write a note. She had said everything that needed to be said with her eyes the day before. Her cousin, a sturdy woman named Martha, would arrive at 8 o'clock to take over the management. The mother she was leaving behind was strong, stronger than Clara had given her credit for. Clara stepped out onto the porch. The mare Tahan had gifted her was tied to the hitching post, saddled and waiting. The horse was a solid creature with intelligent eyes, a beast made for endurance rather than speed. Clara threw her satchel over the saddle horn and mounted. She did not use the mounting block. She pulled herself up with the strength she had found in the canyon, the strength of a woman who had slept on the earth. She rode down the center of the main street of Lone Mesa. The town was waking up. Shutters were being thrown open. The baker was sweeping his stoop. As the sound of hooves echoed in the quiet morning, people stopped. They looked up. There was Mr. Henderson, who had once told her she was lucky to catch a man like Thomas. There was the milliner who had laughed when Clara dropped the flour sack. There was the sheriff, leaning against a post, drinking coffee. No one spoke. The jeers and the whispers had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, confused silence. They watched her ride, her back straight, her chin lifted toward the western sky. In their eyes, Clara saw a strange mixture of emotions. There was curiosity, certainly, but beneath that, there was a grudging respect, and deeper still, a sharp pang of envy. She was doing the one thing they all dreamed of, but dared not do. She was walking away from the safety of the fence. She did not look down. She did not nod. She simply rode, a figure of blue cotton and determination cutting through the gray morning, at the very edge of the town, where the rutted road dissolved into the open prairie. Tahan was waiting. He sat on his paint horse, motionless as a statue carved from copper and obsidian. He wore no war paint today. He wore a simple buckskin shirt and canvas trousers, the clothes of a man ready to work, not fight. He did not smile when he saw her, but his eyes softened, the hard lines around his mouth relaxing. He did not need to speak. He reached out his hand. Clara guided her mare closer until their legs brushed. She reached out and took his hand. His grip was warm, rough, and solid. For a moment, they sat there, the town behind them and the world before them, connected by that clasp of hands. Then, Tahan released her. He turned his horse toward the northwest. Clara fell beside him. They did not ride single file, one leading the other. They rode abreast, parallel, 2 equals moving toward a shared horizon. The journey took 6 hours. They arrived at the creek crossing just as the sun reached its zenith. It was a beautiful, wild place. A grove of cottonwood trees offered shade near the water, and the land rose gently into a shelter against the north wind. It was already changing. 3 teepees made of buffalo hide stood in a semicircle, their smoke flaps fluttering in the breeze. But beside them, the frame of a permanent structure was rising. Thick logs of pine had been hauled from the foothills. Stone foundations had been laid. "The winter camp is far," Tahan said, gesturing to the structure. "But this stays." "A trading post," Clara said, looking at the beams. "A home," Tahan corrected, "for the rest of the day." Clara did not rest. She unpacked her seeds, finding a patch of earth near the creek that looked rich and dark. She helped Tahan lift the heavy logs, her muscles straining, her breath coming in short gasps. They worked in a rhythm that required no words. He knew when she needed help. She knew when to hand him the ads. By sunset, they were exhausted, covered in dust and sweat. But the first wall of the cabin was waist-high. That evening, the air turned cool, the heat of the day bleeding out into the vast sky. Tahan set up a large tin tub behind the privacy of a canvas sheet strung between two trees. He filled it with water from the creek, warmed by stones he had heated in the fire. "Wash," he said gently. "The dust of the town is sticky." Clara went behind the canvas. She stripped off her work dress, her chemise, her stockings. She stepped into the water. It was heavenly. She scrubbed her skin, watching the water turn brown with the dirt of labor. She washed her hair, letting the cool liquid soothe her scalp. When she emerged, wrapped in a large trade blanket, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, dotted with the first stars. Tahan was sitting on a log by the fire, whittling a peg for the cabin wall. He stopped when he saw her. Clara's hair was wet, hanging in dark, heavy ropes over her shoulders. Her skin was flushed from the heat of the water. The blanket clung to her damp form. Tahan stood up. The knife and the wood fell from his hands, forgotten. He walked toward her. He did not have the predatory look of Thomas or the casual entitlement of the men in the saloon. He looked at her with a hunger that was terrified of its own intensity. He looked at her as if she were the only source of water in a desert. "You are clean," he said, his voice rough. "I am new," Clara whispered. She let the blanket slip slightly from her shoulder. The fear was gone. The shame that Belle had tried to plant in her heart was gone. She stood before him, a woman of 30 years, with scars and calluses, and she felt beautiful. Tahan reached out. His hand hovered near her face, then touched her wet cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Clara," he breathed. It was a prayer. He stepped closer, closing the distance between their worlds. His arm went around her waist, pulling her against him. She could feel the heat of his body through the wool of the blanket. She could smell the wood smoke and the sage on his skin. She tilted her head back. He lowered his face to hers. The kiss was not like the one Belle had performed for the crowd. It was not for show. It was slow, deep, and overwhelming. It tasted of salt and promise. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his long hair. She felt a shudder go through him, a release of tension held for a lifetime. "I am here," she whispered against his lips. "Stay," he groaned. "Stay until the stars fall." "I am not going anywhere," Clara promised. They sank down onto the buffalo robe spread near the fire. There was no rush. There was only the profound relief of two lonely souls finally finding the matching piece of the puzzle. It was a mature love, forged in fire and wind, sexual and sacred all at once, under the vast canopy of the Texas sky. With the creek singing nearby, Clara Cartwright and the warrior Tahan claimed each other, not as conquests, but as partners. 3 months passed. The seasons turned, painting the cottonwoods in brilliant gold. The cabin was finished. It had a solid roof, a stone chimney that drew smoke perfectly, and shelves stocked with flour, coffee, ammunition, and blankets. News traveled back to Lone Mesa, carried by the circuit riders and the braver merchants. They spoke of the halfway house, the trading post where a traveler could get a fair meal and trade without fear. They spoke of the peace that held in the region. The railroad had diverted south, respecting the boundary markers Tahan had set. The raids had stopped. But mostly, they spoke of the woman. The Cartwright woman, they called her, not the spinster, not the rejected bride, the Cartwright woman. They said she sat on the porch of the trading post, stitching moccasins with hands that wore a massive silver ring. They said she spoke Comanche with a flat Texas accent and haggled with the fur traders with a smile that could freeze water or melt butter. One afternoon in late October, a buggy arrived at the post. It was driven by a hired hand from town. In the back sat Isabel Belle Hale. She looked tired. Her silk dress was dusty, and the lines around her mouth had deepened into permanent grooves of dissatisfaction. She did not get down. She simply watched from the road. She saw the corral, full of healthy horses. She saw the Comanche children running by the creek, laughing. And she saw Clara. Clara was riding the paint horse, returning from a check of the trap lines. Beside her rode Tahan. They were laughing at something, their heads close together. Tahan reached out and adjusted Clara's collar, a gesture so casual and intimate it made Belle's heart ache. Clara looked up and saw the buggy. She reined in her horse. She did not look away. She sat tall, her face brown from the sun, her eyes clear and bright. She smiled, not a gloating smile, but a genuine, peaceful smile. Belle looked at her sister, then at the empty seat beside her where Thomas should have been but was not. Thomas was likely in a saloon in Santa Fe, or losing money at a card table. Belle realized then that she had won the battle for the appearance of happiness, but lost the war for the reality of it. Belle signaled the driver to turn around. She did not wave. She simply lowered her head and rode back toward the town that suddenly felt very small and very empty. A week later, a circuit rider delivered a small package to the porch of Cartwright's boarding house. Mrs. Cartwright, her hair now completely white, sat in a rocking chair. She took the package with trembling hands. She unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a square of soft, tanned deerskin. Embroidered on it in dyed porcupine quills was a pattern of intricate beauty, wildflowers growing out of a rock. Folded inside the leather was a note and a small gold object. Mrs. Cartwright picked up the gold ring. It was the engagement ring Thomas had given Clara, the one she had thrown in the dirt. She opened the note. The handwriting was strong, the letters looping and firm. Mother, I return the past to you. It was too small for me. I have chosen a future that fits. We are well. The winter will be cold, but the fire is warm. Your daughter, Clara, Mrs. Cartwright held the ring in one hand and the embroidered leather in the other. She looked at the gold band, cold and lifeless. Then she looked at the leather, smelling of smoke and care. She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. She drew her arm back and threw the gold ring as far as she could into the dusty street. It disappeared into the dirt. Then she took the leather square, smoothed it carefully, and went inside to place it on the mantelpiece, right next to the clock. She is living, Mrs. Cartwright whispered to the empty room. My girl is living. The final image of the story was one of motion. It was late evening on the high plains. The sun was a massive red disk, touching the western edge of the world, setting the clouds on fire with crimson and gold. Clara and Tahan rode along the ridgeline. They were silhouettes against the burning light. They were moving slowly, in no hurry to get anywhere because they were already where they needed to be. Clara adjusted her grip on the reins. She looked down at her left hand. The silver ring with the turquoise stone caught the last light of the day. It glowed like a captured piece of the sky. She looked over at Tahan. He felt her gaze and turned. His face, once so guarded, was open to her. The wind blew his black hair back from his face. His eyes were quiet, filled with the steady, enduring love of a man who had found his equal. The sun goes down, Tahan said softly. But it comes up again, Clara replied. Every single day. We are free, Clara, he said. Yes, she answered, taking a deep breath of the cool, wild air. We are free. They turned their horses and rode directly into the sunset, two specks of defiance and love in a vast, untamed land. The story of Lone Mesa would eventually be written in history books as a tale of railroads and cattle drives. But around the campfires of the Comanche, and on the front porches of the old women who remembered, a different story was told. It was the legend of the white woman who threw away a diamond to pick up a stone, and the silent warrior who found his voice in her heart. It was a lesson whispered to every girl who felt trapped and every boy who felt alone that freedom is not a place you go to, but a choice you make, and true love belongs only to the brave. Thank you for listening to this story of the Wild West. It has been a journey of dust, heartbreak, and the kind of love that burns brighter than a prairie fire. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Are you in a busy city, dreaming of the open plains? Or are you somewhere quiet under the stars? Let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed Clara and Tahan's journey, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video to help us ride further. And if you want to support these stories even more, please hit the hype button so that this tale can be heard by more people. Thank you. And until the next sunset,